Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound's 2026 Entry Draft Preview Show, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Vic Morren, Neil Smith, and so pleased once again to be joined by TSN's Director of Scouting, longtime analyst Craig Button. Such an exciting time for so many prospects, and of course, the draft coming up this weekend, June 26th and 27th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. Isn't it refreshing that we could actually say KeyBank Center, unlike the World Cup, where everything has to be the city stadium because of the stuffed suits that run FIFA?
Yeah.
Greg, I didn't know anything about that. I'm not watching that World Cup of soccer, but if you say so, Vic, it's good to call it by name. Welcome in, Craig, and thank you again for always being with us, with me and Vic. I got to tell you that, to me, the entry draft is my favorite time of the entire hockey year because, or was when I was with a team. And Craig, I say that because you used to go to one location. In the early days, it was always Montreal. But it was the one time where you got to see everybody from every team, and you got to talk to everybody and say hello to everybody and have fun with everybody and all the league personnel. And the other thing is that no matter who you picked, they were all going to be stars. All your picks were going to be stars for that one day. I mean, there was no downside. I mean, of course, it was when you saw them skate in September that you realized all the mistakes you'd made. But I loved the entry draft. To me, that was more fun than any time.
It's funny, draft pick, like you're picking 17, great player. And the 18th pick, great player. And we can't believe that player was there at 161. It's unbelievable. We were so lucky to get that player at 160. It's a great day for the young players. It's a great day for the families. And Neil, to your point about, being all together, it really is special in a hockey arena with the players walking up as they hear their name called, putting on a jersey, taking a picture. The draft now is decentralized. The teams want to sit in their own little cozy offices and whatever you want to call them, hockey department rooms, and do it from there. I think hockey always had something unique, and we've lost it. And we talk about FIFA, and you think about the stadiums and KeyBank where it is. Yeah, it's a KeyBank arena. No teams are going to be there. So kids are going to walk up. I mean, it feels like the NHL gave up something that was special and unique. And I think that for me, it's disappointing because like Neil, there's so many great memories of watching the excitement, cameras on who's going to go one. When Mario Lemieux was going one, you knew he was going one. Nobody knew he wasn't going to come to the Pittsburgh Penguins table. And there was going to have to be some, can you please come down and put on a jersey? Nope. Eric Lindros with the Quebec Nordiques. So there's different excitements and there's different intrigues that go into the draft, but it's always something that's so enjoyable.
And there's always the trades that are announced by the commissioner up at the front of the room. And when he says those magical words, we have a trade to announce, everybody goes, ooh, and they wait because there's big trades made at the draft. I mean, big name guys sometimes get moved at the draft. So that's all part of the excitement as well. And then the camaraderie. And Craig, before we came on the air, you said about the camaraderie of the scouts in the old days. And right up until I went to the Rangers in 1989, I love that camaraderie. I love seeing the other scouts. You never knew when you'd bump into them. It could be in Belleville one night, or it could be in Stockholm 2 weeks later, or could be in Prague, or, and you just, oh, you're over here too. But you're always friends with all those guys because although you weren't friends in sharing information, as you said, but you knew what they were going through because they were going through the same stuff you're going through, trying to get to games, trying to make evaluations of players, trying to spend some time at home if possible because you're always on the road.
Yeah, and it was different. I mean, you had to go on the road for long stretches of time because that just was the nature of it. I laugh now when I think about going and finding directions somewhere. And I'm thinking, like, how did we do that? I don't recall having maps. I remember trying to ask in whatever language it was, where is the hockey arena, the Ishalle or the ice hall or whatever it was called. Here's how it worked. And, now we got directions, take a left here. You'd get to a street and you go, okay, I need to get there. You'd ask somebody else and then you'd carry on. Then you'd ask somewhere else. And, they're trying their best to help you. And, the language barrier is there. But the camaraderie that everybody was going through the same thing. So everybody understood, hey, let's lend a helping hand to make sure that everybody is safe. Everybody can get to where they need to get to. And like Neil said, you're not sharing information. But it was interesting. I'll share a quick story that I love. Claude Ruel, the late Claude Ruel, who did everything in the game. He was an assistant coach. He was a head coach, Stanley Cup winner in 1969 with Montreal, scouted for a long time, player development, Scotty Bowman's assistant. So Ray-Jean Houle became the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens in 1995. I'm in Belleville. That's what made me bring it up. And I see Claude, and Claude always treated me great. And Claude, he's talking about Ray-Jean. We drove over from Montreal. And I said, where are you staying tonight? And I said, you're going to Peterborough tomorrow night because Peterborough would play on Thursdays. Neil, Belleville played on Wednesdays. And I said, where are you staying? He goes, we're staying in Montreal. I said, but you're going to Peterborough tomorrow night? He goes, yeah. He goes, Ray-Jean's never scouted. He needs to understand what it means to be on the road. So they drove from Montreal to Belleville, back to Montreal, and then they were driving back to Peterborough the next day because Claude wanted to teach Ray-Jean what the scouting world was about.
And that's what it is. It's being in the car for long stretches of time.
Well, the fruits of the labors of the scouts are about to come to the forefront on Friday and Saturday. And so to get this started, let's first hit on the first 10 picks as of Tuesday morning. So we're 3 days away from the draft, but the first 10 picks in this order: Toronto winning the draft lottery will pick first, followed by San Jose, Vancouver, Chicago, the New York Rangers, Calgary, Seattle, Winnipeg at 8, Ottawa at 9, that is part of the Brady Tkachuk deal, and Nashville at 10. The Senators and the Blues, both with 3 picks in the opening round. San Jose, Vancouver, the Rangers, Calgary, and Washington with 2 each, and 8 clubs have none. So with that, Craig, Toronto Maple Leafs, John Chayka, they're on the clock. Gavin McKenna is easily the most well-known to fans in the United States in particular, and probably Canada as well, since he's come from there. But what can you tell us about McKenna that makes him the right fit for Toronto? And then other players that you have looked at, you have scouted, and you think should be on the radar for the teams picking right behind?
Well, one of the things is there's no Connor Bedard or Macklin Celebrini or Connor McDavid or Auston Matthews in this draft where, like, you're picking one, you go, that's the guy. That's who we're picking. It just isn't that type of draft this year. You look at Gavin and you think about Wendell Clark, who went first overall in 1985. Like, Craig Simpson was the second pick. So, there was a lot of debate. Should Craig Simpson be? Neil, you were right in the throes of being a chief scout. And Wendell was a defenseman at that time, playing for Saskatoon, and Craig was playing at Michigan State. And I think it's similar to that. Like, okay, who do you want? What type of player? I think McKenna has got that playmaking ability. I think that it's something that Auston Matthews sorely missed with the departure of Mitch Marner. And I think John Chayka has signaled, the manager now, that this is not going to be a rebuild, a blow it up, that they're trying to get their team into a position where they can compete for a playoff spot next season. So I think that a guy that can do the things that Marner did, albeit that he's younger, he's not advanced, but it feels like he becomes the right player for the Toronto Maple Leafs at this time, and trying to get Auston Matthews excited and back to form where he can do what he does best, being a great goal scorer.
So where do you look right behind this? Because there are several good prospects, and as we said, San Jose, who's already got a plethora of great young players, they're second on the clock. Where do you see them going? Do you see them going across the pond, or you see them staying in North America?
Well, it depends if you want to go across Lake Superior. Is that across the pond? Because, there's water there, right? They have so many terrific forwards, led by Celebrini. They drafted Misa last year. They drafted Sam Dickinson a couple years ago, and he's a big, strong, top pair left defense. It feels to me like if you're ever looking at a team that says, okay, who could really fit for our group? It would be Chase Reed, the defenseman from Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. His rise has been really significant. He was playing in the North American Hockey League 18 months ago. Then the NCAA ruling came in. He jumped to Sault Ste. Marie, was excellent, had an excellent year, was great for USA at the World Junior. He's going to Michigan State next year. Not ready for the NHL. And I'm going to make this statement. I'm not there yet, or I would have him number one. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if he ends up being the best player in the draft.
With Vancouver picking 3 and the Sedins now active in Vancouver's front office, do you see Ivar Stenberg going there?
Well, he could. I mean, I don't think there's any question that he could go there. It feels to me, and Neil, you can talk to this as well as anybody. You're drafting 17 and 18-year-old kids. They're not ready for the most part for the NHL. So this idea like the NFL, you draft for need, the Vancouver Canucks need is center ice. They need some players that can play in the middle of the ice. But at the same time, it might not be need for right now, but you need to stock your prospect shelves. Because you don't want to wake up and hear, oh, geez, we should have drafted a center. We should have drafted a defenseman. Tim Bernhardt, who I worked with for a long time, always said, draft a goalie every year. Because if you don't draft a goalie, you're not going to have one when you need one. And I think that's the example that I use. So, like Viggo Bjork, who's an excellent center, a diminutive center. I call him a Swedish Nick Suzuki. You got Caleb Mahaltra, a center, who's really good. I think the coach in Vancouver might like Caleb Mahaltra, the way he plays, just the way he plays. And then you talk about Stenberg. Stenberg's a really good offensive player. He's more shooter than playmaker, but you need guys who can put the puck in the net. I mean, Neil, your good friend Ken Holland, my dear friend Ken Holland, he used to laugh at scouting meetings when the scouts would say, all he does is score. All he does is score. He goes, well, scoring really matters because they put it up on the scoreboard. And, they say, hey, he scored, we get a goal. And at the end of the night, if you have more of those, you win. I think their options are open, but the options open at 1, it's open at 2, it's open at 3. You got 5, 6 defensemen. It's open at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It really is wide open in this draft. And I'll get into something about the draft a little bit later, a draft that Neil knows very, very well. And it just kind of gives you an illustration of what teams are going through.
Greg, a couple of things from me. From what I understand, Manny Malhotra told Vancouver that he would take the job as head coach, but under no circumstances should they draft his son. Have you heard that?
I have not. And you drafted Manny and Manny's a straightforward, person that's a good competitor, smart guy, but maybe it's a situation. But if I have a choice between hiring a coach whose average tenure in the league is 2.2 years or a center that might be able to play for 16 or 17, sorry, Manny, but you're not dictating to us who were drafted or not drafted. My question to you, Manny, is how do you think it'll impact, the rest of the team and the players, and how will you deal with that? And then we can make a decision on the coach, because if this starts off with him telling them who they're going to draft, it's not going to get better. And I would advise strongly against taking that course of action if I was Daniel and Henrik and Ryan Johnson.
And I know that when I talked to Manny not too long ago, a couple of months ago, before he got the Vancouver job, he said, yeah, I'll come on the podcast, Neil, but I don't want to talk about my son. I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't comment on my son. I'll just let him get drafted and we'll see where he goes. That's the only thing I've heard. A second question from me to you, Craig, because I don't know these young guys other than what I've heard. Is there anybody besides McKenna that might be able to step in and play this coming season? Or is he the only one that you think will be able to make the transition?
The Latvian defenseman, Albert Schmitz. Albert Schmitz played in 5 different countries this year. He played in the Liga, the senior league in Finland. Then he came over and he played in the USA at the World Junior Tournament. And then he went back to Italy and played in the Olympics for Latvia. And then at the end of the season, which was peculiar, I didn't see, he went and played in Germany for Munich. And then he went over to Switzerland and played for Latvia in the World Championships. He's a man of many, many countries. And I believe, Neil, he could play in the NHL next season. I believe he has the maturity, the ability, and I see him as the most ready player to come in and help a team be successful. I really do.
Could you give us a name of a current NHLer that he reminds you of?
Michael Sergachev, really good skater, like good shot, jumps into the offense, not an 80-point player, but somebody that can, play those minutes, skate well, think well. We did a little mock draft on Tuesday, June 23rd. I got to make 32 picks. It was hard enough to make one for when I was working for a team. Now they're asking me to do 32 picks, right? And then this is funny. People go, there's no way they're taking them. And I go yeah, I don't know who they're taking, but the teams don't know who they're taking either. They got to wait to see what unfolds. But I had Smits going to the New York Rangers. I put Smits as a New York Ranger at 5. The skating, the experience that he has, and he's a good player. He really is a good player. So Sergachev would be the player that I would use as a comparable type.
In your 8, 9, and 10 slots, you have Keaton Verhoff from North Dakota, right defenseman, Daxon Rudolph, Prince Albert, also right defenseman, and Tynan Lawrence from BU, who's a center. Any other natural fits for a team in the top 10 that you could potentially match these particular players with?
Well, number 8, Winnipeg is picking 8. There's some little bit of question about how much interest there is in Connor Hellebuck. We heard what he said at the end of the season. Like Dylan Larkin, we saw Brady Tkachuk get traded. What is the true narrative in terms of, is it somewhere just where the teams are phoning, or are they seriously considering trading them? They need a second-line center. And you didn't mention Vigo Bjork, and I'm not saying Vigo will be there at 8, but when you have Mark Scheifele, a superstar number 1 center, and you have Adam Lowry, a terrific third-line center, and Vigo just played in the World Championships for Sweden and was really good. There's a guy that might be able to, you can squeeze him in. He'd be exactly what they're looking for. And he might be able to play next year because he played in the SHL this year. He played in the World Championships. He's sturdy. Yeah, he's going to get better. But when you have that type of setup, when you have Lowry backing him up and at the front side, Scheifele, you might be able to get him in there. So that would be one guy that I think would fit in there really nicely. Nashville needs a center. They're picking 10. I think Tynan Lawrence just checks a lot of boxes. I talk about a center for the Vancouver Canucks. I think Tynan Lawrence, and Tynan played in the USHL and then he left to go to BU. It's hard enough to go and play college hockey as a 17-year-old as it is. But when you're trying to jump in halfway through a season, I think he had some speed bumps along the way, but he's still a good player. And I think that's what you got to be able to differentiate between with respect to, okay, was his play representative of what his potential is, or is his potential better than what his play represented? And I think that's the case with Tynan Lawrence. He was the MVP of the USHL playoffs the year before when Muskegon won the championship. So if you've watched Tynan, you know he's a good player.
I have a couple for you, Craig. Of these North American names that we see in your top 10, how many are Canadian? How many are American?
So you got McKenna, who's Canadian, Chase Reed, who is American, Carls is Canadian, Verhoff is Canadian, Rudolph is Canadian, Tynan Lawrence is Canadian. Then you have Stenberg, who's Swedish. You have Smits, who's Latvian, Malhotra, who's Canadian. And I think that might sum it up. Does that add up to 10?
It does, and it's a lot of Canadians. That's why I was asking, because Americans are making gains on Canada all the time. I notice there's no goaltender on here in your top 10, which doesn't surprise me. But who is the best goalie out there, and is it clear-cut?
I don't think it's clear-cut, Neil. And I don't know the player. I've watched a little bit of video on him. His name is Dmitry Borichev. He's a Russian goaltender that, listening and talking to NHL personnel, they think he's the best goaltender. It's hard to watch video on a goaltender and really have any type of confidence. I mean, somebody would say you shouldn't have any confidence watching a goaltender because you just don't know. But at the same time, look at what Columbus did last year. They drafted Pyotr Andrianov. People are going, oh, really? Where did this guy come from? Well, Borochev could be that player as well, based on what I'm hearing and discussions and chatter. NHL personnel, people that I respect, have said about Borochev. So I don't think it's clear cut, but don't be surprised if you hear Borochev's name slip into the first round.
Any really good fit for him, as you see, for teams that are picking down towards the bottom half of that first round?
I wouldn't say that is there any one really good fit. I mean, you're probably looking at a couple of years before he's coming over. So it would be more, Vic, about putting a player on that prospect shelf and saying, okay, we have somebody we think highly of, and we're not going to have him for 2 years. I think the vast majority of these players aren't going to be around for 2 years. So it shouldn't change with a goaltender. And the Russians do a really good job of developing their goaltenders. And I think that becomes a factor when you're looking at, drafting one, where are they coming from? What kind of influence do they have in terms of their development? And I think it's positive when you look at the Russian goaltenders.
You both have spent so much of your careers on the executive level going through these drafts. And is there a mindset that you have every year? Would it have changed from year to year in terms of the best strategy? Is it the best fit? Is it the best player? And is that dictated by where you're picking or what your needs are? Neil, can you start and just go into that a little bit in terms of the mindset?
Well, for me personally, it was always best player. It was never positionally. It was always get the best player you can. And sometimes you can go really wrong with that, as I did with Pavel Brendel. I would have taken him number one, actually, in the draft. And the only reason we didn't take him number one is because we had a couple teams ask us, could we wait? Because they knew we would get Brendel at whatever it was, 3 or 4 or 5. I forget where it was. And that was so that Brian Burke could get the Sedin brothers up ahead. And that was his brilliance, I got to admit, on that, to take that chance and get them. But we never really said, like, is there a defenseman there? And if a defenseman and a forward were equal, then we'll tend to go with the defenseman or something like that. It was always pretty clear cut to us, meaning the staff, at that particular pick, whether it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, who was the best player. Then the other thing I want to say, the strategy, Vic, because we've never discussed this before, a lot of teams back in those days had a master list. And it went from 1 to gazillion or whatever, and they rated everybody, and they went right by that list. And we didn't do it that way. We had an Ontario list, a Quebec list, we had a Western Canada list, and we had a college and high school list. And there was one scout responsible for each of those lists. In other words, they were put together by the entire staff for that guy, but it was that guy who was heading up either high schools and colleges or Ontario or Quebec or Western League or Europe. Sorry, don't forget Krister. So when it came to a pick, you just went around the table and said, Craig, who have you got? Vic, who have you got? Neil, who have you got? And it became obvious who the player was that you should pick if he was still there like 2 picks from now when your pick was coming, because you'd be getting prepared for it. And that's how we did it. And to us, it became very obvious on every round who we should pick. Now, a lot of times that doesn't mean we were right, but that's how we did it.
There's a few things there, Vic, and just to go back in history a little bit too. With respect to Pavel Brendel, I think Pavel Brendel had like 70 goals in his draft year.
92.
And I've said this many times. Yeah, you're drafting players that have been the best players at the level below the NHL. You're not drafting 5 goal scorers and thinking they're going to score 50 in the NHL. You're drafting high-end players, and then there's that, you're projecting them, you believe in them, you've watched them lots. And your confidence level, that's our guy. We want that guy. And everybody has had their successes, and you've also had, we'll call them misses, but it's been the process that you've gone through that allowed you to have successes too. This is the part of the draft that becomes really challenging, and it's not easy because you have to put a stake in the ground. You have to say, we're taking that guy. No team I've ever heard stand up and go, we are drafting Vic Morren from Queen's University, and we're not really happy about it. We don't think he's a great skater. We're not so sure about his potential. Everybody's excited about the player they draft because they've watched and they really believe that that player can do it. That's number one. And Neil, you can speak to this really well because you were a big part of it. Even though you had taken the job with the Rangers, you were still a big part of this draft, which I consider the best draft ever by an NHL team. And that was by the 1989 Detroit Red Wings. And, there was a lot of things that, how the draft was worked, how you were looking at players. But Vic, the first pick was Mike Sillinger, who played lots in the NHL. The second pick was Bob Bugner, who played lots in the NHL. The third pick, some guy, I think he was Swedish, Nick Lidstrom. Well, and Neil, you know that this was a big part of your work. You know darn well.
No, I was doing it. Craig, I was there. I was chief scout.
I know. Yeah, I know. And you and Krister. And then they said, why don't we take this Fedorov in the 4th round? They were thinking about taking Bure in the 6th. They had to settle for Dallas Drake, who had a pretty decent NHL career. And then later in the draft, they took Vladimir Konstantinov. Just go look at the numbers of games and everything they did. So it's changed now. You can't wait for Nick Lidstrom in the 3rd round. They knew that Nick had only played a certain amount of games and, maybe hadn't been seen. Why? Because they'd been over there. And we talk about the camaraderie. They knew who was watching. They knew who might have been paying a little bit of attention. So all of a sudden they get that draft, which I've considered it the best draft class by a team ever in the history of the NHL. So there's so many different factors. So you think about, why didn't they take Lidstrom in the 1st round? Well, they didn't have to, but they managed it. You ask about strategy. They did have a strategy, but they knew when it came to a point in time, and Neil, Krister was kind of kicking you under the table, I'm sure, telling you we better take him now, right?
Well, actually, Craig, the quick story on that one was the first 3 rounds were the only rounds you could take 18-year-olds.
That's right.
And so you couldn't take an 18-year-old after the 3rd round. So I said to Jimmy Devellano, we got to take this guy in the 3rd round, because if we miss him and don't take him, next year he'll be in the 1st round and we won't get him. So that's what happened there. And then, of course, Fedorov, we tried to get him the year before, I believe, and they ruled that he was ineligible. He hadn't played enough games in Russia. And then they counted Bure as ineligible to us, and then Vancouver took him. And so that's how that went. But I know it's a whole different thing now than it was back then. Back then, if you had the cojones to do it, you got way ahead of everybody. If you didn't have the cojones and you wanted to stay stubborn with your Canadian, Western Canada and Ontario and players and no college guys, nobody that wears a shield, nobody that does this, nobody does that. Those were the old days. And I know it's drastically changed.
Yeah, well, Vic, let me add something too when we talk about 8, 9, 10. And I'll go to the previous year in 1988. Mike Modano was the first overall pick. A lot of discussion, Modano or Linden. And so they went 1-2. Curtis Decision played 1,000 games in the NHL. He went 3. And I know this like the back of my hand. So he went 3. And this is to Neil's point.
Yeah.
Number 4 was Darren Shannon. Number 5 was Daniel Dore, like a big Quebec kid. Number 6 was Scott Pearson. Number 7 was Marty Jelena, really good player in Hull. The 8th pick was a little high school guy from Thayer by the name of Jeremy Roenick. The 9th pick was Rod Brindamore while he was going to college. He played in Notre Dame in the Junior A League. And then the 10th pick was Timo Solani. Well, yeah, he could skate, but he's Finnish. Think about that. Just think about 8, 9, and 10. We know what Modano became, but right to what Neil said, there was this bias on, we can't take a high school guy. We can't take a high school guy. We're not taking a guy from the Saskatchewan Junior League. Why wouldn't he go play in the Western Hockey League? We don't want that. And then Timu. I mean, unbelievable. And those are the things that, and believe it or not, Vic and Neil, some of that thought still prevails. Believe it or not, it still prevails.
It's such great stuff, unbelievable stories that just the draft itself generates. And, of course, we remember when Brian Burke was able to move up and pick the Sedins consecutively. The first draft that I worked was back in 1984. Actually, I was still trying to break into the business, but I was in Montreal that year. And, of course, that's when Mario Lemieux was picked number 1, followed by Kirk Muller. And then Eddie Olczyk went 3rd to the Blackhawks, Ally Afraidy 4th to Toronto. But the intrigue there was that Montreal was hiding this guy in a hotel room because they thought that one of the 4 teams picking ahead of them would kind of jump in and grab this player. And it wasn't until Iafrate was picked at 4 that they walked Peter Swoboda out of the hotel room, and Claude Mouton, the PR director for the Canadiens, walked him into the floor at that point, and then he was, of course, announced to the crowd. You remember that, Craig?
I remember watching it like years later. I don't really, at the time, I was still younger, but I remember that whole thing. And another thing I remember too about that draft, and it's funny about a draft, Mayor Lemieux and Kirk Muller were 1-2. And there was people that thought Kirk Muller was going to be a better NHL player than Mayor Lemieux. And okay, that's fine. I'm not here to pick on anybody's opinion or anything, but like, this is what goes into the draft. This is what goes into the process, the thought process. And Montreal, the draft was in the forum, and, you're bringing out Peter Swoboda. It's pretty impressive when you think about how they hit him, and then they bring him up, because that was Czechoslovakia at the time. That was still communist. So they had to get him out, and away they went. And, we know that Peter became a terrific NHL player.
And there was a lot of prejudice against the Quebec League back in those days. Most of the scouts in the league were Canadian English scouts, some American, obviously English scouts. But the Quebec League was prejudiced against. Like Mario got 3,000 points that year. And, of course, everybody said, well, it's the Quebec League. It's the Quebec League. He won't be able to do that in the NHL. And Kirk Muller, though, I mean, he comes from Guelph. And Guelph is in the OHL. So what he did, I'll tell you one real quick New York Islander draft story, and this will be a fast one. When it came time in the draft to pick Mike Bossy from Laval, the discussion was between Henry Saraceno, Mario's dad, who Mario is now the Islanders' Quebec scout, and Jimmy Devellano. Jimmy Devellano was the Ontario scout for the Islanders. And Jimmy really liked Dwight Foster because he led the OHL in scoring. And Henry Saraceno had been at every Monday night game, which is Laval's home night, and seen this Michel Bossy play. And Al Arbor stepped in and said, take the guy that can score the goals. I can teach him how to play defensively, but I can't teach him how to score goals. And that's how they ended up taking Mike Bossy.
Yeah.
Well, what's amazing about that, too? I know the Bossy family very well. Pat, his brother, coached me for 2 years when I was in Bantam and Midget. And so, the Bossy used to go and watch the Bossy play, watch Michael play with Laval on the Monday nights, But I remember one night my dad was running Central Scouting, and it was in his draft year, Neil. And so I would have been like 13, 14 years old, somewhere around there. And I went with him to Trois-Rivières. And Michel Bergeron was coaching in Trois-Rivières. And Laval was a middle team. They were a good team, but, Trois-Rivières was big and tough, and they had it all. The Quebec League was quite rugged and vicious in a lot of ways. And so at the end of the game, my dad says, come with me. I got to go see Michel Bergeron after the game. So we go down into the coach's office, and Michel's Trois-Rivières won. I forget how many he scored or whatever he did. But Michel, him and my dad are talking about Mike Bossy, and Michel comes over and he stands up. He goes, Jack, I tell you, you can take the stick and hit Mike Bossy right on top of the head, and he still scored 3 goals. Mark Napier went to the Montreal Canadiens right in their own backyard. They missed.
We could go on all day with these stories, but we'll cut the draft part here. But Craig, thanks so much for doing this part of it, but we've got more. And just a reminder that this is NHL Wraparound, the 2026 Entry Draft Preview, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Now, there is some news coming out of the NHL on this Tuesday, and probably maybe the worst kept secret out there. Mike Babcock officially hired by the Edmonton Oilers as their head coach, and DJ Smith, who finished the season as head coach or interim for the Los Angeles Kings, will be an assistant. Initial gut feeling now that this is official.
Well, it feels like it was something that was only waiting to be official once we heard about Mike and what the Oilers had asked the NHLPA, and then what the PA asked the NHL to do, and then, being cleared by the NHL. Listen, I don't think there's any question that Mike Babcock has proven that he's a good coach in the National Hockey League. I really hope that he acknowledges the error of his past behaviors, because I think that'll be significant for him moving forward. Because, some of the things that he did in his behaviors are unacceptable. And today, certainly, there's no place for it. The one thing that I have a really big issue with, and it's with the Edmonton Oilers. When you come out and say to everybody, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, however it got out, they wanted it out that they were supportive of Mike Babcock. You can talk to your players. You can ask your players what they think and then try to get their input. You never put the players, in my view, in that spot where they're supporting the coach. Because now, if things don't go right, now they're the ones. They're the ones. I thought it was the lowest form of managing when you put two of the best players on the plane, you put your best players in that spot. Because you should never say, well, our coach is on board. Neil, the greatest leader, I mean, there might be some other ones over there. Mark Messier, there's nobody greater as a leader than him, right? And you spent a lot of time with Mark Messier, right? And Mark Messier knew what his job was as a player and leading a team. And it wasn't to tell you who should be the coach.
No, when I hired Mike Keenan in April of 1993, I didn't tell Mess. I didn't even get his opinion on it. I knew that he'd played for him with Team Canada's and stuff, but there's a great example of it. And when I was letting Roger Nielsen go, I wasn't telling Mark, I'm letting Roger go tomorrow. Or what do you think of this? Or what do you think of that? You can't involve the players in this stuff. You've got to make it, a big boy decision and go with it. And, you're the one that has the experience of this, and that's your job. Their job is to be on the ice.
Here's the sidebar also, is that I guess Kelly McCrimmon got his way because all of the head coaching vacancies have now been filled. Bruce Cassidy's spending this season, at least the start of the year, on the sidelines.
That might be good for Bruce.
Well, he gets paid, which is not their first concern. I know that being a hockey guy, my first concern was I wanted to work. I want to be with a team in the NHL. The money came second, but yeah, Bruce won't be on the sidelines for long, though. If he's even on the sidelines when training camp comes, who knows, right? In this league, you never know what teams will do.
One thing I'll say about Bruce, too, and I really do believe in this, and I think that, Bruce coached for a long time in Boston. He never really had a time to decompress before he was named the head coach in Vegas. And I think that as a coach, as anybody in life, you want to be able to reflect on your experiences for two reasons. Number one, to understand what you can do better and to understand, hey, with a fresher outlook, how can I approach the next one? Bruce is going to get opportunities. Maybe he wanted this one. I can't speak for Bruce. But I think that to Neil's point, okay, so he's going to get paid. We know that. He's going to have other opportunities, but I think it'll benefit Bruce long-term for him to just be able to kind of evaluate what went on, what he can do to be better. And I really like Bruce. I hope that it allows Bruce to come back that much better as a coach, because he's already shown that he's a top-level coach.
Very quickly, want to hit a couple of other items here before we wrap up our show. We've had two major trades with Brady Tkachuk going to Florida and Darren Raddysh going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Dylan Larkin, Elias Pettersson, Darnell Nurse. Are they next? And Craig, I'll hit you first with this. Do other general managers pay attention to the environment and the swirl that's already taken place, or is it all white noise to them in terms of potentially moving these players in the short term?
Well, I think there's two things. Is that number one, managers are always paying attention to what possibilities exist out there. So it's not white noise. It's, you hear about a player like Dylan Larkin, you're a manager going, okay, he could help our team. Okay, I better make a call. I better make more than one call, right? And then you're also trying to make sure you have a really good understanding of your own team and where things are at. I look at the Quinn Hughes situation. I look at the Dylan Larkin situation. Maybe the Connor Hellebuck situation right now. I'm going to keep Brady out of it. It felt like that was something that was going to happen eventually. I don't think he was unhappy in Ottawa, just like I don't think Matthew was unhappy in Calgary, but they wanted to be somewhere else. I think in the case of Quinn, and Quinn specifically, they lost faith in management. They lost faith in what was going on there. Hellebuck's comments at the end of the playoffs kind of indicate that. So I think as a manager, you better make sure you're running a pretty good operation. That doesn't mean you're contending for the cup every year, but you better understand what environment you have for your players. Because when players start to say, I don't think I can win here, because you want competitors. We want players that want to win and they're competing for the prize.
Yeah.
So when they say, I don't think I can win here, that becomes a real lightning rod for you as a manager and an organization to take a good hard look. Okay, what do we got to do to be better? We saw what happened in Vancouver. They cleaned house. And, right now, it's interesting to see what else will happen. I expect there to be more moves, Vic and Neil. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the trades we just have seen. I think there's more to come.
I really like Dylan Larkin as a player. I've said that for years now. I actually told Stevie Yzerman that when we had dinner one night, how much I like him as a player. Don't know him personally, but like him as, obviously they made him captain, so he's got some good character, leadership abilities. But I got to tell you, Craig, I just laugh or I'm confused by the fact that now you have no trade, no move, no nothing clauses in all these contracts. Everybody wants one. But then all of a sudden you decide, well, I don't want to be here anymore. So you couldn't move me, Mr. Manager. You couldn't do anything with me. You were stuck with me. But I'm not stuck with you. I want to leave now. So I'm asking you to trade me someplace. And it just seems like I wish Stevie Yzerman would just say, no, I'm not trading you. Like, no, you're on a no move. You're here. And the same with Darnell Nurse. Like, I know some of them, and maybe Darnell Nurse is a contract they just want to get rid of anyway because it's so overpaid. But I have to laugh about the players want all this protection that they get to stay where they are, like they're an accountant working in an accounting office somewhere. But then when they don't want to be there anymore, they just say, oh, I just don't want to be here now. So here's my list of 3 teams.
So Neil, you were a part of Board of Governors meetings and rule changes for a long time in the NHL. So how about if I throw this potential proposal at you? A player with a no move clause that requests a trade, it automatically rescinds your no move clause and the team can trade you anywhere.
I think that should be the rule. That I think absolutely. You have given up that right once you say you don't want to be there.
Love it. Great idea. Craig, before we let you go, we have some unfinished business from the Stanley Cup Finals, and this will be 3 things that you need to pay attention to. And number 1, you were in first place heading into the final with 77 points. I had 75. Neil had 63, and we're going to get into a little bit of gerrymandering before we wrap this all up with goal totals and stuff like that. But to wrap up item number 1, you picked the Carolina Hurricanes in 6 games. And so you finish on top with 87 points. You win the Secretariat Wire to Wire Award. So congratulations on that.
Way to go.
Thank you. Maybe what I should do is do what Rod Brindamore did. Just go tarp soft. Just go right down. No, you don't want to see that.
This is on video. So, so item number 2, and I'm going to still pat myself on the back for some bold underdog picks that came through during the course of these playoffs. I picked Philly over Pittsburgh. Got that in 6 games. I also had the Golden Knights taking out Colorado. However, I did pick Vegas to win the Stanley Cup, so I get no points there. So therefore, because I picked 33 goals total, and Craig, you picked 32, Neil, you picked 27, and the total was 42, so at least I got closest without going over, so I get the Price is Right Participation Award for that one. So now item number 3, we come to Neil. And, of course, Neil would have been eliminated, but we tried to be fair and give him the opportunity to move up if he had picked the correct goal total, which, by the way, he was last in anyway. So despite picking Carolina in 5, he still ends up with 72 total points, and he takes the bronze. But for trying to cook the books a little bit here, he gets the Bernie Madoff Award.
Well, congratulations, Craig. That was a hard-fought battle, and I know how proud you must feel. And I can only say that I know how proud your dad, Jack, would be of you right now, because I scouted for years with Jack, Vic. Great guy. I remember him honestly, like it was yesterday. I remember him so well. Washington Capitals, great man. I'll always have such great memories of being with him.
Well, that's one. We're back to the camaraderie, Vic. And when Neil was starting out, my dad had been scouting for a number of years, as well as a couple of his contemporaries. But, you end up in that camaraderie. And it's pictures Neil sent to me over the years of my father and others that were really influential in my life. And I pinched myself how lucky I am. And I pinched myself how lucky I am to do this with both of you. I have great pleasure and great joy doing it. And you started this segment off, Vic, by saying unfinished business. But when you're the champion, you get to celebrate all summer. It's not unfinished. So here we go.
You're going to have a great summer, Craig. Craig, again, a million thanks for doing this and doing other shows during the season. It's always fun. It's my favorite time is when you're coming on. And I'm going to send you some pictures as soon as I can get them copied. And you'll look back into the crystal ball of the old days.
Like I said, I enjoy it so much with you. Thanks for having me. Anytime, all the time.
We'll take you up on it again real soon. Neil, I hope that our listeners and viewers have the same appreciation for Craig Button's presence on so many of our shows, particularly during the Stanley Cup playoffs and then the draft, because his history runs so deep. And one of the great things for us is in doing the show, we get an education as well.
Well, yeah, you hear stories that you haven't heard for a long time or that you haven't heard at all. And then you also get his perspective on things, which is always going to be different than mine. Even though he was a GM and I was, there's still different perspectives. He's got a rich family history in the NHL. His father, Jack, as I mentioned, was chief scout of the Washington Capitals for a long time. His brother, right now works for the Columbus Blue Jackets in the pro scouting department. And he's just a real good guy. That's the best part about him, is that he is just a fine guy and a fun guy.
I just liked right at the beginning of our discussion talking about what the draft used to be, what the culture used to be, how it has changed now with the decentralized draft. And of course, the last centralized draft we had was 2 years ago in the Sphere. And you thought, boy, you really couldn't top that. So maybe we should just try to keep something big like that. And it's gotten actually smaller because of the setup the last couple of years. And I hope it changes.
Yeah, and I've never been to a decentralized draft. It would feel so odd to be there without the teams being there. But apparently, according to Mr. Bettman, who was on our show, he said that that's what the owners wanted. They wanted to keep it decentralized.
I think he also said, though, that if they wanted to change it back, he'd certainly be open to that as well.
Yeah, and I know every hockey person I talk to longs for the days when it was all in one place. So we'll see what happens going forward.
We start with the draft and we'll finish at the other end of the spectrum, and that's the Hall of Fame, because the inductees for the November 9th ceremony were announced on Monday. And from the players category, Patrice Bergeron, Carey Price, Pekka Rinne, Keith Tkachuk, who I think we've been championing, or at least you have been championing for a long time. From the women's game, Cindy Curley. And from the builders category, Brian Burke, who was one of our earliest guests on NHL Wraparound.
Somebody that I've known for decades. And Brian Burke's done a lot of different things in the NHL. And I'm really happy for him.
Well, I think Craig and I are going to start our lobbying on your behalf, and we're going to put a call into Mike Gartner and see how we can get that going, because it would certainly be our pleasure to be able to share that with our viewers a year from now.
That would be wonderful. And, we'll see what happens. You know that I'm going into the New York State Hockey Hall of Fame on July 12th, so that's quite an honor. I won quite a few championships within the state of New York. I hadn't thought about it before, but 3 Stanley Cups and 2 Calder Cups where the home team was based in the state of New York. So that's going to be a fun night.
And I look forward to joining you there.
I look forward to it too.
And that will wrap up our show for today. Thanks to Craig Button, as always, for joining us with his insight on this upcoming NHL draft. And thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS Financial Services, Inc., or UBS, is a sponsor of NHL Wraparound. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and NHL Wraparound or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program.
If you want to send us an email, you can reach us at neil@nhlwraparound.com or, of course, vic@nhlwraparound.com. You can find our podcast on every platform, including Apple, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, and YouTube. And, of course, if you do see us on YouTube or listen to us on YouTube, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you can, good, bad, or indifferent. You can find us on former Twitter, which is X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, at Radiate, that's the at symbol, and RAY, capital D8.TV, and on Buzzer, BZZR.com, which is a great platform which gives you access to all the sports, not only just hockey.
Our website is NHLWraparound.com. And our free agency preview will be our next scheduled show. That will come up next Monday, June 29th. And, of course, if there is major news breaking, then we will do quick takes as warranted. So, on behalf of Neil, I am Vic. Enjoy the rest of your hockey week.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.